Okay, I see that the recording and transcription has started, so that is my cue. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Catherine Delnao. I also go by Kathy. I am the state librarian and the commissioner of the Department of Libraries. And I'm really pleased to see so many library trustees in attendance this morning at this overview training that Joy Warland is presenting on behalf of the department to orient you to your role as library trustees. And we know that many of you are new library trustees, have just taken on this role, and we know some of you may be returning to get a refresher. So we just wanted to welcome you all. I did a little bit of math, and I think that in the state of Vermont, if it's true that we have 185 public libraries, because I think we might have a couple of more hiding out there, and if every library board has at least 5 members, that means that there are at least 925 trustees of public libraries in the state, which is amazing. You are in a big group and you are in a wonderful group, and we really appreciate what you do to support public libraries locally. We have municipal public libraries, we have incorporated public libraries, and Joy is going to talk about the differences between those two. But we at the Department of Libraries love all of the public libraries, and we really do appreciate the efforts that you take to make sure that your public library is running smoothly and providing the best service that it can to the people of Vermont. And we are here to support you in that work. And this overview training is sort of a starting point for that relationship. So with that, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here today. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. Oh, I want to make sure I introduce Jeanette Schaefer. Jeanette is our Assistant State Librarian for Library Advancement. And I'm going to turn it over to Joy Warland, who's going to conduct the training this morning.
Thank you, Kathy and Jeanette, and thank you everybody for being here. I just want to second what Kathy said. We just really appreciate your being here. I know that you are not paid for your work as trustees, but it's such important work for the health of the Vermont libraries, which we love so much and which do such terrific work. And a lot of that terrific work really starts with the trustees. So thank you for being willing to be a trustee and for coming to training. So we will talk more about your opportunities for more training and some of the things that Kathy mentioned. And I am going to get started by sharing my slides. So Jeanette or Kathy, can you see?
Not yet. Oh, yep, there it is.
Okay.
Got it.
All right. So right there in my favorite color, green, Vermont green. You're a library trustee now, so we are really here at the department to support you in that and to help you with that. So that's the that's your welcome and your thank you, and let's get into some of the details. So you see the next slide, right, Jeanette?
Yep.
Okay. So this is a statute. You'll hear a lot about Title 22 in your work as a trustee. We talk about it a lot, and it's a really great thing for you to go back and look at sometimes. So it basically states that in the state statute, it says that free public libraries are essential to the general enlightenment of citizens in a democracy, and that every citizen of the state of Vermont should have access to the educational, cultural, recreational, informational, and research benefits of a free public library. And I'm not really familiar with statutes about libraries in other states, but I think that's really powerful language that it says right in the statutes that every citizen should have a good library. So that's where we come in, that's where you come in, that's where your library staff and volunteers come in. So you're going to have these slides at the end. You can go back and look at that. But I do think it's important to reference that statute. Sometimes share it with your community. Like if they ever are doubting what you're doing, you're required to do it. Your community is actually required to do it. So I find that both empowering and inspiring, and I hope you do too. So the idea of a public library, I think we all have a concept of it, but it also is described in statute and with a quite specific. A library established and maintained by a municipality or a private association, corporation, or group. And its purpose is to provide basic library services free of charge, which is a super important aspect of it, to all residents, which is also a really important part. All of the residents in your community, whatever their status is in terms of economic status, taxpayer status. If they live in your community, they need to have access to your library. So again, libraries can be funded in different ways. We'll get a little bit more into that later, but that's basically the thing that you can go back to if you want just some really clear language on it, or if you need to explain it to other people that might not be as familiar with public libraries as the people on this call are. So Kathy mentioned that we have different types of libraries. Vermont is, I think, a little bit complicated. We have about 2/3 of our libraries are municipal libraries, so actual municipal organizations, and then another third, almost a third, are incorporated libraries, and incorporated libraries are independent nonprofits. So they do get municipal funding, but they are not actually municipal organizations. And then we have about 12 or 13 joint community libraries is what we call them in Vermont. They're joint school and public libraries. They are also usually a municipal governance as well, but they do have their own sort of characteristics because they reside usually in the school and sometimes share staff, and they definitely have two different audiences that they're catering to. So it's really, really important for you as trustees to know which of these things your library is. And it's can be kind of confusing. It basically goes back to how your library was formed. So if it was formed by a vote, it's a municipal library. If it was incorporated as a nonprofit, it should have paperwork at the Secretary of State. So we've sometimes have had libraries, they weren't sure which they were, so they would actually contact the Secretary of State, State's office and see if the paperwork is there. Now, if it is there, then you know for sure you're incorporated. If it isn't, it's possible the library's incorporated, but the paperwork just isn't there. So just look closely. You can also go back through your library's records and minutes from town meetings. I recognize that this is sometimes going to be like 100 or 150 years ago, but there should be some record somewhere of a vote to create the library if it's a municipal library. So we can help somewhat with that at the department, although in our annual report that divides the libraries up, it's self-reported. So you might have better luck like just digging through your own library's records to figure that out. So the other thing is that there have been some changes, like sometimes libraries can change from incorporated to municipal. I guess it could go the other way around too, but I think it's probably more common for the incorporated ones to become municipal. And then there's also these ones that are just complicated because they could be an incorporated library, but the town owns the building, or it's a municipal library, but the employees are not town employees. So you just have to figure it out for your own specific library because they're all different. Jen added it.
Yes, Patty has a really good comment in the chat, and she asked, could you please clarify that incorporated nonprofit libraries are also public libraries? Both of these are public libraries. Thank you for that comment.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Patty. That's a really good point. So basically the services are essentially exactly the same for they vary in terms of the size of the library and different things that they focus on, that kind of thing, but they are still providing those public library services, whether they're incorporated or not. So that is a really, really good point. In terms of incorporated libraries, the number of trustees they need to have, needs to be at least 5, but not more than 15. And again, we have the statutes copied out in the slides, which you'll get a copy of, so you don't need to like read through that right now, but just to so that you have that for later. And so if you think about, like, it helps me to think of incorporated libraries as similar to other nonprofits that many of us are aware of, like whether it's like an arts group or the animal shelter or something like that. They, in some ways, they have that kind of, I mean, they do basically have that structure. So they have a board and they can make independent decisions in terms of, they don't have to do the same thing that the town does. what they do have to do, they do have to follow state statute for what libraries need to do. So we'll talk more about that later, but so certain things like especially patron privacy is one of them that they do need to follow. So just again, be sure which one your library is and be sure that you're doing the things that you need to do for that type of library. I also want to point out that your community members and even people that use the library a lot might not know what you are. So it's really important that you're you know the governance of it and that you're doing it consistently. And also that even if you are an incorporated library, it's really best practices to follow open meeting law and things like that, that for a lot of reasons, but one of them being that your community members may not know. And so they might see that you're acting in a different way than a library down, 5 miles down the road, not realizing that you have different governance. So just be aware of the optics of that. All right, so for municipal libraries, they also have a board of trustees, obviously, and many of you probably are from municipal libraries. So library trustees at municipal libraries some are elected, they can be appointed by the select board as well. Some libraries are a mix of those two things. They also need to have at least 5 trustees. And then the bylaws of your library would probably or should say how many trustees you have. And it is possible to change that if you need to at some point, but it's a process. So, but if you need to just check how many, that's a good place to look at your bylaws. Okay, so, and again, we're going to send these slides out and you can read the statutes and the other slides that have a lot of content on them at your leisure and refer back to them as you need to. So the big picture vision of the library, of trustees, and the big picture for all of us that are involved with libraries is the prosperity of the library. So it's really the shared goal of you, the trustees. Hopefully the staff is very buys into that, the friends groups, the library volunteers, it's a community. So just think about that as like your overall sort of guiding principle is do what's best for the library, work together as units, work as closely as you can with your library director, your select board of your town, because really what everybody is going for is a healthy, growing, thriving library is the word I was looking for there. So in terms of more of the specifics, the trustees are in charge of the oversight of the library. So the governance of the organization and these principles of the duty of care, which is performing duties in good faith in a manner that is in the best interest of the organization. The duty of loyalty, so putting aside your own personal interests, avoiding conflict of interest. Sometimes, if things are going to happen that something with the library that might not be something you personally agree with, but acting as a unit, as the board. And then the duty of obedience, which is to do things in accordance with the statutes like we've talked about before, also the organization's charter and bylaws. So just your first step is to learn all of that stuff. Well, first step maybe is coming to this training, but look at the statutes, make sure you have a copy of your bylaws or know where they are in the library so you can go in and see them. And so you're able to go into this at the beginning knowing what these requirements are. So that leads me to my next slide of what things you need to know. So as we've already talked about the governance, make sure you know whether it's municipal, incorporated, community library. You of course need to know the names of all the important players, right? Your fellow trustees and contact information for them, the library director, the other staff, the volunteers. Lots of libraries are very dependent on volunteers and have a strong volunteer base. You should know who those people are. Your library might have a Friends of the Library, and if so, you should know at least the officers of the Friends of the Library and build a good relationship with them. Again, as I said, know the library bylaws, the library policies. You should know the staff roles, how many staff you have, what kind of roles they do in their job descriptions. Definitely know the everyday things like the library hours, the email addresses of people, the website address. And then it's really important that you are familiar with what the library offers, because you'll find out if you haven't already that people, once they know you're associated with the library, you're going to get asked questions about the library all the time. And it's a great opportunity to really advocate and be a champion of the library. But you have to know what all of, have a good feel for what the library offers. So be sure you're aware of the services, the any sort of digital services that, so you're able to, even if you're not using them yourself, you're at least able to tell people that they're available at the library, that there are that they have streaming services for movies, that people can come in and use the computers, they can print things, all those sorts of things that I think especially the non-book part of it that people might not know. The more that you can talk about that out in the community, the better. So just be sure that you have a good sense of the overall things that the libraries do, that the library is doing. Also, be sure you're familiar with the strategic plan and the library's mission, because you'll be working on that, and just use the current one that is existing, hopefully existing and up to date. Get really familiar with it so that you know what the guiding principles of these services I was just talking about are. You also should be aware of your town's plan and where the library plan and the town plan intersects, and the latest annual report, both of the library and the town. And I put in there also the Vermont Public Library Standards. You'll see, if you, it's kind of small in there, but they're from 1986, but they are actually the most current ones that are approved by the legislature. So just be aware that they exist. And I think, I don't know, Kathy or Jeanette, if you want to say anything else about, our relationship at the department with them, which is, it looks like Kathy's.
Yeah, I'll just hop on for a second. We were looking into these because they are quite old, and the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont has talked about them a little bit. And I know that there is some interest to update them. And my understanding is that these are part of a formal state rulemaking process. And that's something that I learned, that I'm learning about more. And so we might work on updates to them in the future. But for right now, just thinking about your libraries, it would be great to look at what those standards are currently, what those guidelines are currently, and really strive to meet those standards. Right now, the library, the Department of Libraries typically doesn't deny anybody a summer reading grant because they're not operating 14 hours a week. But if we did get into a situation with competitive grants where we needed to make decisions about which libraries to give funding to, we would probably look at some of those considerations and think about which libraries are offering the most service to the public. So those operating hours are one of the things that's called out in here. And in general, it's a good starting point. Since they are really old, we see lots of libraries in Vermont have really exceeded that standard from 1986, which is wonderful. And just trying to be aware of these right now. And if we do some rulemaking process in the future to update them, we will be sure to let everyone know so that you can be part of that process.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
Kathy. Yeah. All right. So those are, sort of the basic things. And then some broader considerations. We've already talked a little bit about this, but understanding local, your municipality laws, and state and federal laws that relate to libraries. Again, always putting the interest of the library first, avoiding conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is so slippery in small towns, and so you just have to kind of use your discretion. I mean, there are going to be some things I think that will come up where, if there were more people in the mix, that it might be easier to avoid conflict of interest, but just be aware of it and be really transparent as much as you can. And also, if you avoid the optics of conflict of interest, even if you know that you're not really doing that, just again, thinking about the perception of the library in the community is so important for funding, for support, just for empowering the library to be a thriving organization. So you have to really be conscious of what the perception that the community members have, including, and maybe even especially the ones that don't use the libraries. You want to create a good impression on everybody if you can. Exercise discretion and respect confidentiality. The things that happen within the anything that happens in an executive session is confidential. Because of open meeting law, people can attend your meetings, but just, I think the discretion part, like, as I said, you're going to be asked about the library, when you're at the grocery store or the post office or the ski lift or whatever. there are some things it's okay, talk about the services all you want, but don't talk about, internal confidential workings of the library. And I already mentioned this, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important that the board presents as a unified group. So even if there have been disagreements in the meeting, once you decide what direction you're going in, speak as a unified group, and no one else outside the, needs to know about anything that went into that, just when the decision is made, that's the decision of the entire board. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, but avoid involvement with regular operations of the library. This is something that we get contacted about a lot, the kind of confusion of what are the things that the trustees are in charge of, what are the things that the director and other staff are in charge of. So my former colleague that was the governance consultant always used to say that the trustees are the forest, the librarian is the trees. So I don't know if that really works out of context, but yours is the big picture oversight, but then the daily workings, like hire a great librarian and let them go and do what they do. And obviously the role of the board is to supervise the library director, but the daily regular operations is up to the staff. It's great if you attend library events and if you're a library patron, but we need library trustees that aren't necessarily readers. Don't feel like badly if you're a trustee. You don't have to check books out of the library to be a good trustee, but you do need to show up, and help be the face of the library. And again, it really helps with your awareness of what's going on at the library. And you're all here today attending a trustee training, so the more you do of those, the better. And we also have been inviting trustees to come. We do a lot of training at the department. We do more for library staff, but there's so much, so many of the trainings are also relevant to trustees. So you're welcome to come to any of the trainings that we do, except for very few things we do that are specific to like Director Summit or some of the core classes for the certificate program are only open to people enrolled in that. But generally, if you see something that's going to help you think might help you be a better trustee, help you learn more about librarianship in general, please sign on, because since we do everything online, we very rarely have a cap on how many people we can have in a workshop. So just be aware of that, and then just stay current on issues that affect your library locally, which there's a lot of different dynamics in specific communities. So read Front Porch Forum, see if the library is being mentioned in it, see if there are other things that affect the library being talked about locally. And then also from our department, we share out a lot about what's going on in the state and also nationally. If you can stay in touch with that, your library director is a really good source for that, because they're much more embedded typically than you have other jobs, or and that is their job to be the librarian. So a lot of times they're really tapped into what's going on statewide and nationally. So ask them what's going on if you are wondering about something. And then creating and maintaining a good relationship with the friends of the library, if you have one. That's another place where things get kind of blurred, like who does what or who pays for what. So it's really great to have something in writing between the library board and the friends of the library. So that's all very clear of who does what, and there isn't confusion over that. It also helps for your fundraising. So if it's very clear who's doing what, and it doesn't get blurred, then it's easier for people making donations to know which organization and what kind of services they're giving their money toward. So as far as your sort of more hands-on kind of responsibilities, like I already mentioned the bylaws, I have on here review and update. You may not have to update them that often, but look at them every so often and make sure that they're not just really out of date. Policies, it's really, really important to look at regularly and update regularly. There have been a lot of libraries doing a lot of great work on that in the past couple of years, partly because we're so much more aware of equity and diversity inclusion kind of considerations than, libraries always paid attention to that, but there's definitely a greater awareness and sensitivity around that. And if you look at a library policy that's maybe 10 or 15 years old, it might not be through that lens in the way that we'd want it to be today. So that's just one example of things that you need to look at and update. At one of the resources I have for you is a schedule of which policy to look at each month. so that it, so it isn't like you realize you haven't done it in 5 years and then suddenly you have 20 policies to go through. If you haven't looked at them a while, you might have to start there, but if you can get on a regular schedule of looking at them, and it'll be much easier. Strategic and long range planning is really, really important, and an important role that trustees can play in conjunction with community members and library staff. But you should be really aware of what those long-term plans are and why, and what the outcomes the library organization is striving for. It is the library trustees' responsibility to hire the director and supervise them and evaluate them regularly. I'll just say right now, because this is another thing that's confusing, it is not the board's responsibility to hire and supervise and evaluate the rest of the library staff. So if there are other staff members besides the library director is the supervisor of those other, like a children's librarian or an assistant librarian or a circulation librarian, whatever it might be. And that would apply also to the volunteers, and like in a lot of the smaller libraries, the volunteers really operate as staff. So that's in the purview of the library director, or there might be like a volunteer staff person that might be their job to supervise volunteers. Establishing the library budget and presenting it to the select board. You should work closely with your library director on this, because they understand, like, how much money do they really need for books or for digital services, particularly when there are fluctuations in that. Like right now, things are way more expensive than they were. Books are more expensive. Other materials are more expensive than they were even a couple of years ago. So that's something they're living with every day. Also, during the pandemic, we saw so many increases in digital services. That's something that your library director will be really in touch with, what the community needs, and changing kind of things in the budget like that. And be familiar enough with it that you can go to the select board and explain, especially if you're asking for an increase, but any funding really, it's not uncommon for there to be pushback about, why does the library need this much money? And you as trustees should be prepared to explain why. So it's a really important role to play. In terms of, just going back, I forgot to say this about supervising the library director. So different libraries do it different ways. Some do it as the complete board. Some have a personnel committee. Occasionally just the chair of the board does it. So like, figure out what works for your library and be sure that the library director knows what that process is going to be. So it's not like, oh, I didn't know I had to talk to the whole board once a year, about my evaluation. So just whatever way you do it, make sure that they know, and that you do it in a consistent and respectful way. The library building and the grounds, that one is sometimes complicated, because if the town owns the building, there are some things that are going to be up to the town to take care of, but they probably need to hear about it from you. So, stewardship doesn't mean you're actually doing the work necessarily, but you do have to be aware of what the library building needs are. And part of that is also having an emergency preparedness plan. So I don't know how many of you were here when Tropical Storm Irene came through Vermont, but I was working at the library in Waitsfield at the time. Unfortunately, the library didn't get too much damage, but like 50 feet away, huge floods, like the house floated down the river right by the library. So stuff like that happens, and you need to be prepared for it and have a plan, and especially a communication plan around that. If something like that starts to happen, who do you call, and who has a key to the library, and who can go and turn off the water or turn off the gas or whatever needs to be done. So we have some templates for that. That's one of the things, like, if you reach out to us, we can help you with that. We've had some good training on that. Meet regularly and effectively. So there's some slides later about how to best practices for board meetings, but in those standards, and I believe in open meeting law as well, there is actually a requirement for library boards to meet at least 4 times a year. So just be aware of that. And like, when your librarian has to do the annual report that they turn into the Department of Libraries, they'll have to write how many meetings there were, when they were, how many. I'm not sure if it's how many people were present, but you do have to have a quorum to have an effective meeting and take votes. So just make sure that you're doing that regularly and that you have good agendas and you're planning, you know what you're going to do, and that you keep on track and get it done. Being a champion for the library, which I've already talked about some, but I think I really can't say it enough because it's just a really, really important job that you can play. Of course, the library director is usually a strong champion of the library, but it means more coming sometimes from other people, because um, of course, the library director is passionate about the library, but you probably know different people than the staff does. You might have just a whole different set of connections in the town. So bring it up at parties, bring it up, when you run into people at, social events in the grocery store, et cetera. So just everyday advocacy, that's like you can do formal advocacy, but you can also just, talk about great things that are going on at the library every time you open your mouth, really. That's my recommendation. So then the last thing on the slide is just to ensure compliance with funding and grant terms. You may have heard already that like the Department of Libraries has funding coming up, grants coming up for capital projects. So there's going to be a great opportunity there. But for those grants and any other ones, just be aware of what's coming up and then make sure that you're compliant so that you can actually take advantage of those opportunities. So just again to clarify, because there is often confusion of this, there's the responsibilities that the board has that we've already talked about, and then the library director helps create the policy in an ideal world. So that the trustees they sign off on them, but input from the director is really, really helpful. But then once they're created, the implementation of them and applying them to daily life in the library is up to the director. And again, as I already mentioned, they hire and supervise staff that besides the director. The collection, buying materials, deciding what things to have on the shelves, deciding what digital services to have, programming, that's all in their authority as well. So share ideas if you have them, but it really is, they have the authority to make those kind of decisions. And remember that many of them have been through years of training for this kind of work. And I think that's another thing that I think usually library trustees are aware of this, but sort of the general community sometimes doesn't realize that librarians are professionals, they're trained professionals. So, they know how to curate a collection and create a collection and be responsive to their community. And so be respectful of that. They do need to report to you as the board regularly, so make sure they have an outlet for that. And they should also submit a written annual report to the town, which of course you can look over, but it should come from them. So because they really are the public face of the library in a different way than you are. So. All right, so there's a lot of library policies that that can exist, but ones that you just really absolutely have to have are on this list. And so, obviously you need to know how you're circulating, what are the rules around circulating things. Then the collection development, the policy for that, and how they make those decisions, where they find the books, how they decide. That's a super important one, especially now in the climate of book challenges. You want to make sure that you have something in writing that if that happens, you can point to the policy, or your director can point to the policy and say, this is how I made this decision about why this is in our library. It's a really important, we'll talk more about intellectual freedom a little bit later, but that's a really important one to understand. That's basically not censoring. I mean, it's hard to explain a little bit, but because I realize, as I said, intellectual freedom, that's not necessarily like language that you might be familiar with, but it's the freedom to access information, access books without being controlled in any way. So, lots of things in writing that will help you support that premise, and it's a very important premise of librarianship. So, and I don't need to go over all of them right now, but just again, be really responsive to the people that are working in the library and knowing what the needs are of the people that are coming in, and that might change over time, and be aware of how you want the policies to affect that. So there are some libraries that might not need as many policies because they just don't have issues that come up. But even in that case, it's great if you have a policy before an issue comes up. So, and I also want to mention while we're on this, I had talked about equity, diversity, and inclusion being much more, we're paying more attention to it than we had in the past, even though I think libraries like to think of ourselves anyway. And I think we genuinely do try to have we've always tried to, as a profession, be respectful of those issues. But now libraries are looking a lot at policies through that lens and seeing that things that might have seemed okay, especially things with like building use and is it okay for somebody to fall asleep in your library? Well, since there used to be policies that said that that wasn't okay, maybe it really is okay, and it doesn't. Saying that it isn't okay might disenfranchise certain people and more than others. Things like whether or not people can have food in the library, you might want to think about that and have rules around it, but maybe not have a flat out no on it. And then another interesting thing that people have been doing with library policies is putting them through. There's a tool that you can put written language through to see what reading level it's at, and so having them be like at a 6th to 8th grade reading level, so they're super accessible that people can read them, and it's not intimidating. And which also just reminds me that you want to have your policies on your website and printed out at your library too, so that if somebody comes in and asks you about them, it's really easy for them to find them, and they can even find them on the website without having to ask you for them, which is important too. But and again, back to the reading level thing, once they find them, they should be accessible to almost everybody, so just be aware of that. And again, that's something that we can help with. We can point you to those tools that will help with that. And then I'm just going to go on to the reviewing of them. We do on this slide, and again, these are all links, and you're going to get the slides after. But we have some sample Vermont library policies. It's a good mix of sizes of libraries, types of libraries we got incorporated. We have municipal, we have large libraries, small libraries. Some of them are complete policies, like everything, and they're also divided up into specific ones, like a social media policy or child behavior, that kind of thing. So again, you don't have to create this from scratch. You can use what your library already has, or if you don't have them, look at some of these examples. The American Library Association, ALA, also has guidelines for library policies. And they also have a document specifically for interpreting equity, diversity, and inclusion in your library policy. So I think the title of one of my slides that we're going to get to in a second is like, you don't have to do this alone. So just keep that in mind. I'll talk more about that later. As far as the best practices for your board meetings, as I said, meet at least 4 times a year, follow Robert's Rules of Order. Your library probably has a book about that if you're not sure what it is, and certainly you can look up online as well. Share agendas and documents in advance of meetings. That's actually required if you're a municipal library to share the agenda by open meeting law, and it would be great if incorporated libraries did that as well. Give a chance for the public to interact with you in the meetings and share their ideas, as well as library staff, and then share the minutes of the meeting as well. So then again, if you're a municipal library, there are requirements around that dictated by open meeting law. And if incorporated libraries, it's just best practices for them to do that as well. The municipal public libraries, the records, in terms of records, municipal libraries are public bodies. And so again, open meeting law applies. There's a guide here, and then we have a quick guide included, a link to a quick guide to it included in these slides as well. We get a lot of questions about open meeting law at the department. I'll just give you a hint. A shortcut is just to go right to the Secretary of State's website, and it's really, really clear on there. You can look at this document that's linked here, or the quick guide, and your questions will be answered there. I mean, we're happy to do it as well, but I just think that they do just have such great resources that you could just skip that step if you want to save yourself some time. So boards of municipal public libraries are public agencies. So the state's public records law applies to them. So basically, you'll see like sometimes at the bottom of the library director's email that this is a public record. So you want to be aware of that in some of your communications, and just if you're at a municipal library, they are your communication is open to the public. Incorporated libraries, again, they're not required to do some of the same things, but it is really best practices if they do, because the idea behind open meeting law is transparency, and like people feeling not feeling disenfranchised or separated from these organizations that they and remember that incorporated libraries do receive tax fund. They do receive money from the municipality, so they are actually they have I think an ethical duty to act in the same way in terms of the transparency around it. I didn't explain that very well, but anyway, yeah, you can read the slide later. And I guess just to sort of summarize again, that you want to have a good community relationship with your town, with your library patrons, with the taxpayers that are supporting the library financially. And so in the case of incorporated libraries, even though you might not be required to do things, it's in your best interest long term as a organization. These are just a few details, and if any of you that are incorporated, we can talk offline about the specifics, and you also want to probably have access to people, somebody who you can ask for if it's tipping into legal issues. But just some things that we can tell you are you as an organization are tax exempt. So there are certain things that you have to do. You have to file it at the Secretary of State's office, which, to become incorporated in the first place. But once it's established, you have to make sure that's up to date. And just if your library is incorporated and you're pretty sure it's incorporated and that kind of information is not on file at the Secretary of State, make sure that you fix that. And we have had libraries who realized that they just 100 years ago or whatever, that just hadn't happened. So just check into that and make sure that you somebody does that on behalf of your library. So you also have to maintain your nonprofit status. And so you have to follow, there's certain statutes that we have linked here that apply specifically to nonprofits. So just take a look at those. And also, if you need legal advice, find somebody who can help you with that. That would not be the Department of Libraries, but that help is out there in that way. So the other thing that incorporated libraries need to do, they need to file a 990. So just be sure that you're up to date with that, and be aware that that is it's public. So people, if you're an incorporated library, people can see that just the same way that you can for other nonprofits. So just there's certain things that incorporateds have to do, and there are different things that municipal have to do. Again, that's why it's so important that you know which it is, so you are sure that you're following the right path. And here's one that you all have to do. So confidentiality of patron records is a huge tenet of librarianship. It's also in the state statutes. There are just a few examples where there would ever be a reason where you would share why, the way that somebody's using the library, whether it's what they're checking out or, even if they're in the building, if somebody calls and says, is so-and-so at the library today, you really, that's part of their patron record. So the few examples of why, when you would have to do that, are in the statute. If somebody's under 16, the parent or guardian can see their information. If there's what is it called when they, the police come and ask you if they have a warrant, then in that case, you would have to do it. But basically, 99% of the time, confidentiality of patron records is something that you really need to do. So just be aware of that, read that statute, make sure that you're aware of it. And just, it really is such a basic tenet of librarianship that I think it's really embedded in those of us that work in libraries, but it's counterintuitive. And it sometimes to people, or it's new to them when they just get involved in this at this level. Let's see. So yeah, so intellectual freedom, that basically that's the right to read and learn about any topic. And the sort of professional term for it is intellectual freedom. So you can look at these and read through them. They're actually I find them quite inspiring, and they might just kind of shift your thoughts about libraries as well, and just get you in that sort of mindset. So it also, the freedom to read has a lot to do with what kind of things people are reading. So in terms of the collection of your library, the programming that you do, the other information that you provide, we encourage you to have it be reflecting your community and reflecting outside of your community, diversity that people see within their community, and also diversity beyond your town, beyond Vermont. And, hopefully your librarian is steeped in that enough to be doing that in your collection, but it's really important that the board has an understanding of it as well. So this is my "you don't have to do this alone" slide. So there's the Department of Libraries, 3 of us who are on this call right now, but we also have several other consultants and other staff that work on things that will support your work. We always tell people, get in touch with any one of us, whoever you happen to know or have see on, grab their address on the website. If we're not the right one, we'll pass it on to somebody else. So there are certain things we can't help at all with legal issues. We don't have the authority or the knowledge to do that. So you'll have to find other sources for that, but we can help you with a lot of policy development, with best practices. One of the things we do a lot is just put libraries in touch with other libraries that are having similar issues. If you want to talk to a trustee that's at a similar sized library as where you're working, or you're a trustee, we can help you with that. So we do the trainings like this that you're also always welcome to. We do consulting via phone and email. There's a great listserv that if you're not a member of yet, you should sign up for. There's instructions on this link and on our website how to do that. There's a listserv dedicated to friends and trustees. So that's where you'll see information about trainings that we have coming up. We send out a digest twice a week that will go to that, about things that are happening in the library world in the state, things that are sort of library adjacent, that are relevant to the work that you're doing. And then it's also just a great communication tool for you all to talk to each other. So sign up for that if you haven't already. We also have a learning platform called Niche Academy. And Niche Academy is, both you can present classes in it, and then also just we archive all of, like, the recording of this will be on Niche Academy as well as our website. So it's a collection of an archive of things that we have done, and then it's also has a lot of content from other providers, and it's all free for, we subscribe to it as a department, which makes it free for you to access it. So it's divided into, there's an academy, which is all of our department materials, so recordings and classes that we've done and handouts from those, slides, that kind of thing. But there's also a separate academy of other materials for friends and trustees. And you do need to make an account for it, but it's free to make an account. It's very easy. And then you can just look through, and if you need a training on, a certain aspect of being a trustee, of strategic planning or something like that, they're divided by category. So you can look for things and either things that are presented from us, or, as I said, there's a whole academy of things from other organizations. So, and all asynchronous, you can access it anytime. And so please take a look at that and set up an account, and get in touch with me if it's confusing to you, or you forget, about it, where it was or whatever. I can definitely walk you through that. There's also the Vermont Library Association, which has its own Friends and Trustees section. So that's really a really helpful resource. And they do trainings as well sometimes. The American Library Association, the national version of a library association. For those of you who are at municipal libraries, you'll find the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is a great resource. They can help you with a variety of things, insurance. They might have if your town has a lawyer, you can access the town lawyer. Every library is a library advocate, a national library advocacy group that they also do trainings, and they've helped libraries who are getting bond votes, or libraries that are just having some sort of struggle with getting buy-in from their communities. It's a whole organization that does terrific work around that. United for Libraries is the trustee section of the American Library Association. So in order to access most of their material, you'd have to be a member of the American Library Association and then an additional membership to United. But they do have some free things. So if you go to their website, there are some things you'll be able to access even without being a member. These are most helpful just when you get the slides later, the quick guide to open meeting law. The division of duties chart I love, because it divides up the trustees, the director, and the friends group. And it's just really easy to look at and like, oh, is this my thing or is this director's thing? So I know that some of the library directors will like print this out, just one page, and have it up by their desk. So if they get confused by it, it's right there. We have a document of laws and guidelines that affect your work. Again, it's not comprehensive, and we're not providing legal advice with this, but it's just the things that come up regularly, that the statutes and the open meeting law and things like that. So it's just like a list of, you can look all in one place. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the annual policy review calendar example, that is just a good template for how you might want to do this. Then the last thing here is these are just additional resources specifically for incorporated public libraries. These are more general nonprofit kind of resources that will be helpful to those libraries that are incorporated. And you can take a look at those later. And that is the end of the slideshow. That's my dog outside the Fletcher Free Library. And there is a link to an evaluation for this webinar, and then also my contact information. And we have a little bit of time now for Q&A, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I hopefully am going to give you the ability to turn on your mics and cameras.
I can do that for you, Joy, if you want. And
I think that I just did it.
You just did it. Okay, yes, and folks can unmute themselves. We do have 3 biggish questions in the chat. So let me just start with Betty. Betty, it sounds like you are uncertain whether you're officially a municipal library, but it sounds like you probably are, because your director is a town employee and you just can't find a record of it. It sounds like you should try to find record of what you are. I assume you're municipal. Otherwise you would probably be managed by a nonprofit organization. So you should probably dig around a little bit and then see if you can't make that official, if you can't find the paperwork. So
what library is that?
This is Pittsfield.
Yeah. Okay.
Our CML. Yeah. So maybe be in touch with us if you need more information, but try to find that documentation. Then there are 2 questions from Sharon. Apparently there might be some confusion around who has say in Springfield. And Sharon says, hang on a second, let me scroll down to the second question. It seems that because the town considers the library a town department, the town manager hires and supervises the library director and deals with the budget. This seems to conflict with the state law and this training. How is this allowed? Sometimes there is confusion out between the town leadership and the library leadership and who has say in what. The laws are pretty clear about who governs the library, even in the municipal libraries. So it might be good for you to try to clarify with your town leadership, or also seek legal counsel to help you suss that out if your town maybe doesn't want to hear the message. So that would be a communication piece, and also seeking legal counsel to help you really explain the statutes. And Kathy and Joy, if you have anything to add to that, you're welcome to.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
Nick.
think
Yeah.
it does get complicated. But it does say clearly in the statute that the library board has full authority. But then, the confusion comes in because if the library director is a town employee, then then why are they different than all the other town employees? And I will just say, like it plays out differently in every town, but one thing I can say never works, and then we've seen this happen. We love to sort of quote that statute about but the library boards have full authority. But even though it is in the statute, it can sometimes be alienating to people. So I guess, just communicate in a way that is playing well with others is my advice on that part of that.
Yeah. And Joy, you had on your slide, you had the Vermont League of Cities and Towns as a resource. I don't know that you really touched on it necessarily specifically. Municipal libraries do have access to the resources that VLCT offers. One of those resources is legal counsel. And insurance coverage and all sorts of other things. So make sure that for those of you who are municipal, to remember that that is a really great resource that is at your disposal. Laura Massell oh, and Kathy turned her camera on, so you want to add something?
I just wanted to share, a lot of times select boards are volunteers and they're doing their best, and they might be not familiar. They might not have thought to look in the statutes related to the library when they were making some decisions. And so always, like Jeanette was saying, go in with for me, it's often helpful to go in with a point of confusion, like this is going on and this is what the statute says. And talk it through with Vermont League of Cities and Towns, maybe for some counsel. I know that they are happy to help folks figure things out, and that they're a really great resource, and that they've been getting a lot of questions from people recently about municipal versus incorporated libraries. And Jeanette and I actually sat down with Katie Buckley from VLCT recently and kind of went through the library statutes. So I know that we may be producing